This is Pentecost Sunday, and I had talked about doing something a little bit different, and I had told Bill when he and Mick's company played one of our early jazz vespers, I wanted to have them come in on a Sunday morning. And this just seemed, it's taken a while, but we have them here today, and we have had a lot of music. It's a lot of music because this is the birthday of the church, and it's a celebration. And if you want to have a great celebration, you want to have some great music. And our band, the Ensemble of Praise, and Mick's company have provided that for us. And of course, give yourselves a hand because you've been involved in a lot of that music. We celebrate being the church. We celebrate God's giving of the Spirit. The storytelling was about that, the biblical storytelling, about how the group of the disciples, and the room was, if it's the upper room, would be about half the size of this, because it took up the entire top floor of the building above David's burial site. So it's a fairly large building. And they were gathered there, and of course, the rush of the sound as of the rush of a mighty wind and the tongues of fire are about giving God's people power, poured out on everyone, not just on the prophets or the special leaders, but on everyone. And it was to empower us to testify about what God has done in our lives. Now, most of us think of testifying as being talking directly about God, preaching. But all of your living is a testimony. And when the Spirit has touched you, there is something about the way you live that testifies to the presence of God in your life and helps to change other people and to make them want to know what it is you have. They want to do better, and they want to know what it is that you have. And one of the things it said was that the disciples, those who received the Spirit, those tongues of fire, communicated with people who spoke different languages. And what we had here today was God speaking through music. God was speaking through the music, and the music had different accents. But it could talk to everybody. And sometimes that's what we need. That's what our lives are about. Being able to communicate the great love of God. You see, each of you speaks in tongues. And I'm not talking about glossolalia. That's okay. But Paul even said if you speak in that tongue, you need someone to interpret it. But your lives speak volumes about what God has done for you. And you speak it in your homes, on your jobs, wherever you go, you speak in tongues. Mary Eliza Mahoney was the first black woman to go to nursing school. And she went to the first organized professional nursing school in Boston. She was one of 12 students that were accepted to that first class. And it only lasted a year, but only 2 of them graduated, and she was one of them. And then she went on to private duty nursing. But in her work as a private duty nurse, she elevated the profession because she spoke a tongue of justice, of equality. She spoke, remember, when Jesus came, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord was poured out on me." And a part of what he said was to bring justice, to open the eyes of the blind, to set free the prisoners. And you see, they wanted the nurses to be domestic servants, and she refused to be a domestic servant. She understood the importance of the profession of nursing and what it could do for others, and would not accept the limitations that most people wanted to put on it. Not only that, but she helped the school to see that they had to accept more people of color than they wanted to. That's speaking in tongues. Educators speak in tongues. Teachers speak in tongues. I remember in the first grade, I was having a tough time. Didn't like my teacher, and I felt she didn't like me. God rescued me. A new teacher came, and they had to figure out a class for her, so they took from all of the first grade classes, and thank God I was one of the ones that went. Miss Glass was different. She engaged us in such a way that we actually had fun learning. She spoke in the tongue of education and how to touch people's lives. Mrs. Scott, who was a 5th grade teacher, was also like that. You know, they talk about team teaching. This is back in the 50s in a little southern town in a segregated school. And she just told us that this other teacher was going to be teaching us math because that was not her subject. And she went out and they did team teaching. And everybody benefited from it. They were speaking in tongues. They had a passion for teaching, and somehow it caught all of us up in that. We used to do a lot of skits in her class. Didn't know we were learning history and increasing our knowledge of English because we had to write the plays and all of that. But, you see, I remember those names. I remember those people. 7th grade, I think his name was Kane. He was a substitute. He ended up substituting for 7 months because the regular teacher was out. But he involved us in learning what it means to be a part of the civil rights movement. We did, I don't think the principal knew what he was doing because we became sort of radical under him. We learned that it was good to think for ourselves, to be, you see what speaking in tongues can do? It is about sharing what God has done in your lives with the people around you. And I'm going to embarrass you, Alita. Alita is one of the best nurses I know. She is because she shares of herself with others, mentors, helps them through, but it is more than just a job. It is how she shares the gifts that God has given her with others. When sometimes people look at me when I go into a hospital room and I say something, and they will say something, and I'll say, oh yeah, that's I say, and then I'll stop. I say, that's because of my wife, Alita. I listen and I learn. But, you know, wherever you are, whatever you do, let God's Spirit be with you there, because that will make a difference, not only in your life, but in the lives of those you encounter. The people who are best in whatever profession, who make a difference in people's lives, are those who find joy in what they are doing. Matter of fact, they tell us that we are to take spiritual renewal leaves at least once a year. And leave actually every 4 years, but we should do spiritual renewal at least a week. Because if you lose your connection to God, then you can't really share your life. I mean, you can get people upset with you. You can turn people off, but to share the joy of who you are, to share the joy, and I'm not saying there won't be some tough times, but to share the joy of having God in your life in those rough waters, in the times when the sky is cloudy and gray, in the time when there is thunder and lightning, and to be assured that Jesus is in the boat with you. You only have to talk with some of our cancer survivors to know that they have been touched by the Spirit, and they can share that with you. Speaking in tongues is not so hard when the Spirit of God is upon you. And be assured that you won't have to interpret it, because the Spirit will interpret it for the people. I was struck by all of the kids saying their names, and you really couldn't pick it out. So how did all of these people hear in their own tongues? Because the Spirit was there interpreting what the disciples said. sometimes I'll do a sermon and I'll say to myself, well, that one really went bad. And then somebody will come up to me and say, Reverend, you know, this. And I'll say, when did I say that? God's Spirit. Don't worry. You are enough. As the prophet, I think it was Jeremiah, said, when God gets in you, there is a fire in my bones, and I must let it out. Well, people of God, let fire burn in you and let it blaze out to others. I am so grateful to have all of you around me, because you are the ones who continually lift me up. Prayer is not only the formal prayer, but it is living out God's will in your life. And to see that can lift others. Thank God for Pentecost. Thank God for mixed company. Thanks God for Brooks Band, for Elmer, Charles, for all of you, for together with God's Spirit, we're going to change the world. Amen. What are we doing?
Breathe on me, breath of God.